Hello, my name is Lee Tepley. I produced this informal video to present new data on why the Hawaii Superferry will kill humpback whales. This head-on view shows the sharp leading edges of the pontoons, which will cut deep into all creatures that happen to get into the ferry's way, like this mother and baby humpback whale, and these manta rays that spend a lot of time in shallow water. It seems bizarre that the Supeferry will be killing these gentle and graceful animals that are on the Supeferry company's brand new logo. There are other types of fast ferries, including jet foils like this one. They ride high above the surface and tend to be unstable. So when a jet foil hits a whale, there is a large impact. Jet foils have been severely damaged by collisions, and passengers have been badly injured and sometimes killed. In one recent collision, 104 passengers were injured. The Hawaii Superferry will be almost as fast as a jet foil, but it is very heavy and very stable, so when it hits a whale, no one aboard may even feel the collision. In the Canary Islands, the stranding rate of sperm whales increased by a factor of about 8, starting shortly after 3 fast catamaran ferries, like this one, started operating in 1999. But the Superferry people have actually denied that the fast ferries could have collided with whales. They pointed out that these pontoons are made of aluminum and they could not withstand a collision with a whale. But an anonymous whale researcher in the Canaries stated in an email to me that, "I understand that in the Canaries, the operators realized that the vessels withstood collisions very well and no longer stop if they feel a bump." So what could cause a bump? Well, if you don't see a dead or injured whale after the collision, why worry? Out of sight, out of mind. And this may be the attitude of both the Superferry Company and SAC, which is an abbreviation for the Sanctuary Advisory Council. SAC is part of the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, which was set up by Congress primarily to protect humpback whales. But in reality, SAC seems more interested in protecting and promoting the Superferry. For example, SAC approved the whale avoidance policy submitted by the Superferry Company. This is a slick but flawed document which contains only vague generalities about how the Superferry will avoid whale strikes. For example, under night operations, the whale avoidance policy devotes 2 sentences to an infrared system and to portable night vision equipment. That's all. No details. Have any such systems been checked out for locating whales which appear briefly on the surface at night? I doubt it. In reality, the Superferry will have no way of detecting or avoiding whales which are just below the surface, which is where mother and baby humpback whales often hang out. However, the whale avoidance policy does state that the Superferry will try to stay away from areas of high whale concentrations during the mating birthing season. The policy also states that the Superferry will slow down to 25 knots in the same areas, but 25 knots is still about twice the speed generally considered safe to minimize collisions with whales. Still, SAC felt that this halfway concession was important because, after all, modern cruise ships can go up to 25 knots, so why shouldn't the Superferry be permitted to go just as fast? But let's go on to new data that gives conclusive proof that fast ferries have been killing whales in other parts of the world. This picture shows the Pelagos Sanctuary for marine mammals in the Mediterranean Sea. It is home to a large population of finback whales. Reading from the caption below this picture, high-speed ferries were introduced into the area in 1996. In the 6 years following that period, they accounted for almost 50% of the total collisions. Another paper was submitted to the International Whaling Commission in 2004. It documents 24 ferry whale collisions from 1972 through 2002 that were actually witnessed. 11 of these collisions were with fast ferries, which have been slowly replacing slower ferries. This paper does not include data on any of the Canary Island strandings, because they were not witnessed, nor does it include the 8 recent jet foil collisions near Japan. So, there have been 2 recent scientific papers documenting collisions between fast ferries and whales, and there have been news reports of many recent jet foil collisions. And finally, there's a very recent scientific paper which analyzed whale strike data by large ships over many years. This chart from the paper shows that as the vessel speed increased from 12 to 24 knots, the collision rate increased by a factor of over 20. This is a drastic increase, and it will increase even more for the Supeferry, which will go a lot faster than 24 knots. Now, back to the Pelaga Sanctuary. The fast ferries in the sanctuary were apparently not catamarans, but instead were conventional ships that have bow bulbs as shown here. The sanctuary is mostly populated with fin whales. They're slender whales which, when struck by a fast ferry or other large ship, sometimes get impaled by the bow, and often ride on the bow bulb for long distances. This makes it obvious that a collision has occurred. Cruise ships in Hawaii also have bow bulbs, and they can travel at speeds up to 25 knots. But in a paper by the University of Hawaii, there were no reports of whale strikes from cruise ships through 2002. It might be that whale strikes from fast-moving cruise ships have not been observed because, in contrast to finbacks, humpbacks are relatively stubby whales that are likely to slip off of bow bulbs and drift out to sea or sink to the bottom, so a direct collision would rarely be witnessed. It also might be that humpbacks may have learned to avoid cruise ships because they have learned to recognize the sounds of the propellers. But the water jets from the Supeferry will make an entirely different sound. Finally, it might be that cruise ships may travel at speeds that are mostly safe for whales. There are at least 3 and maybe 4 cruise ships that spend full time going between the 4 main Hawaiian islands, taking 7 days for the cruise and running the same route week after week. I analyzed the route map of one of these ships, the Pride of Aloha. Its cruising speed is listed at 23 knots. Its itinerary and route map are shown here. I measured distances and calculated travel times between ports, and compared the results to distances and travel times for the first Hawaii Supeferry during the non-whale season. Details are given on my website. Go to the page called Superferry versus Cruise Ships. I found that the overall average speed of the Pride of Aloha was about 13.3 knots. Therefore, it seems that inter-island cruise ships travel at speeds mostly safe for whales. There's no need to travel faster because the islands are not all that far apart. So it seems that SAC had it wrong when it stated that it did not want to discriminate against the Supeferry because many inter-island cruise ships run at speeds of up to 25 knots. They can, but it seems that they rarely do, and their average inter-island speed is certainly much lower than 25 knots. I also analyzed the route map of the first Supeferry during the non-whale season. It will travel about 3,500 miles each week, compared to about 985 miles for the Pride of Aloha. This means that in 1 week, the Supeferry will travel over 3.5 times the distance traveled by the inter-island cruise ship. So assuming a random distribution of whales, the Supeferry will be about 3.5 times more likely to strike a whale than the cruise ship. This is in addition to the increased collision probability due to its 2 pontoons and high speed, about 2.5 times the average speed of an inter-island cruise ship. So it should be clear that the Supeferry will be a far greater threat to whales than any inter-island cruise ship. Therefore, I believe that the Supeferry should be restricted to speeds considered safe for whales, 12 to 14 knots, through its entire range, until such time as technology becomes available, so that the Supeferry can really avoid striking whales when moving at high speed. That day may never come, but the Supeferry people can argue their case in preparing an environmental impact statement, which I believe is vitally necessary.